Before we get started, let's get your latest news headlines.
Thank you, Nana. It's 1 minute past 4. I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB newsroom. 2 men have been arrested in connection with the death of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell in Liverpool. A 34-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of murder and attempted murder in connection. Meanwhile, a 41-year-old man from Knowsley has been arrested on suspicion of assisting an offender. Olivia died nearly 2 weeks ago after she was shot in her home by an unknown gunman. Liz Truss is defending her plans to cut the national insurance rise a day before the next Prime Minister is announced. Speaking on the BBC's Sunday with Laura Kuenssberg programme, she refused to be drawn on her plans to help struggling families, but said she'll reveal them within a week of winning the post. She also said it was reasonable that the wealthiest receive the biggest benefit from any cut to national insurance.
It's fair. We promised in our manifesto that we would not raise national insurance. I opposed the decision to raise it in Cabinet because it was the wrong decision. I believe it is the right thing.
With it, though. You could have quit if you felt that strongly.
Well, I could, but I preferred to stay in and fight my corner because I'm not somebody who quits.
Speaking on the same programme, Rishi Sunak said if he becomes Prime Minister, he can't rule out introducing electricity blackouts due to rising energy prices.
What I've said is that we shouldn't rule anything out. I mean, we're facing a genuine emergency. I think anyone pretending that that isn't the situation isn't being straight with the country. And by the way, across Europe, those plans are being drawn up. And I would imagine
we should prepare for blackouts, do you think?
Well, as I said, again, I'm not there. I'm not inside. But what I would say is we shouldn't rule anything out because the situation is serious.
Boris Johnson is urging the Tory party to back the next Prime Minister wholeheartedly, regardless of who wins. Writing in the Sunday Express, Mr Johnson praised the abilities of both candidates, saying it was time to put the national interest first. The outgoing Prime Minister also described his last 3 years in charge as tough but exhilarating. The Home Secretary says the Met Police must learn from the appalling mistakes of the past. Writing to the force's new commissioner, Priti Patel stressed the need to restore trust and confidence in the force. It follows a number of high-profile scandals, including the murder of Sarah Everard by a serving officer. However, former Met Detective Chief Superintendent Kevin Hurley told us Priti Patel is simply trying to appear tough.
This is a cynical last gasp of a failing Home Secretary trying to prove she's strong in the hope that Suella Braverman doesn't get the job. So what it's actually done is demonstrated yet another one of her failings because it's made us a little bit less safe. All it's done is given the men and women in the front line serving us right now another kicking to further demoralise them.
GB News can report that the number of people crossing the English Channel in small boats has passed 26,000 this year after more than 900 crossed just yesterday. The number of crossings has increased in the last 2 days as the weather conditions in the Channel have improved. The migrants have been picked up by Border Force officers and taken for processing. More than 200 people have already arrived today. A man has been arrested following an incident that killed an 18-year-old woman and her 8-year-old twin siblings in Dublin. The 3 were taken to the Children's Health Island in Crumlin, but were all pronounced dead. Another 14-year-old boy also received serious injuries, which are not believed to be life-threatening. A man in his early 20s was arrested at the scene, and police are not looking for anyone else in connection with the incident. The Disaster Emergency Committee has received £13.5 million in donations to help people affected by the floods in Pakistan. Record monsoon rains and melting glaciers caused the humanitarian disaster. Flooding has now killed over 1,200 people and 33 million are affected. A third of Pakistan is estimated to be underwater, an area equivalent to the size of the UK. A man who stole a small plane and threatened to crash it into a Walmart in Mississippi has now been charged with grand larceny and making terroristic threats. Tupelo police say Corey Wayne Patterson took the twin-engine plane and then flew it around in circles for hours before landing in a field. Patterson is believed to have had some flight training, but he was not a licensed pilot. Former President Donald Trump has described the FBI and the US Justice Department as vicious monsters. It comes after authorities searched Mr Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate last month. They say they found more than 11,000 government records, including some marked top secret and classified. President Trump made the comments during a campaign rally in Pennsylvania.
The FBI and the Justice Department have become vicious monsters, controlled by radical left scoundrels, lawyers, and the media who tell them what to do, you people right there, and when to do it.
This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Nana Akua.
Good afternoon, you're with me. I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. Now, this week, Boris Johnson pointed out something that I've talked about for some time, but none of our politicians have dared address because it's, frankly, not in their interest to do so. Why? Well, why try to solve a problem that you won't be in office long enough to fix? And even if it does get fixed, which you won't be around to take the credit for, even though you started it. The short-term myopic nature of politics in this country allows our politicians to sidestep long-standing issues that affect you and I, so they can focus on short-term wins that will carry favour and win them votes. They actually don't really need to look at the big picture because they can either blame their failure on their predecessor or they can claim that they didn't have the time to fix the problem. Now, in Boris's speech this week at Sizewell, he spoke about the energy crisis. He said this.
Is the problem. It's called myopia. It's called short-termism. It's a chronic case of politicians not being able to see beyond the political cycle.
He went on to say it's a chronic case of politicians, as you heard there, not being able to see beyond the cycle, which is exactly what I said. And then he said it is because of that kind of myopia that here in this country, that first split the atom, we had only 15% of our electricity from nuclear, and it is failing, whereas in France, it is at 70%. Let's take the NHS. We're being told, don't go to A&E. Have you ever heard anything so ridiculous? You can't get a GP appointment, so where else are you meant to go? Why are they saying this? Because of woeful mismanagement over decades and the different policies implemented by successive health secretaries, even from the same party. In 4 years, we've had 4 politicians failing to address issues adequately and then leaving office. The NHS is in a mess as a result, and so far, neither of the candidates have, in my view, adequately explained how they're going to fix it. Today, I read a story in the Telegraph about Margaret Morgan. Now, by all counts, she was pretty fit. She was 77. She was a retired GP's receptionist. She died of a stroke after waiting hours for an ambulance. Her daughter, Julia, said Michael and Mum were laughing and joking in the kitchen when all of a sudden she started talking gobbledygook and fainted. Now, Michael, Margaret's partner, called an ambulance and was told that it would be about a 4 to 6 hour wait. So he then rang her daughter, Julia, who lives 40 miles away. She arrived. They then called for an ambulance again. After an hour, the first responders arrived, and then after another hour, the ambulance. Unfortunately, the paramedic driving it was not allowed to drive under blue light conditions, so the ambulance had to take a diversion, pick up someone who could, so that they could drive through the rush hour traffic to get Margaret, who had been unconscious throughout, to hospital. And even when they arrived there, there weren't any specialist doctors on call, so they had to email her tests over to someone in Australia, which ironically came back quite quickly. It had taken them almost 4 hours to get to hospital, and sadly, Margaret did not regain consciousness and she passed away. Her daughter said, I think that she had a massive stroke and that was it. Perhaps that's just what I want to think. This constant changing of the guard has affected the services that we hold dear. Health, utilities, education, transport, housing. It's a joke. You can't get a dentist, you can't get a GP, and you can't go to A&E, and you'll be lucky if you get an ambulance. It's costing lives. So before we get stuck into the debate, here's what else is coming up today. Now, my special guest in Outside at 5 is former detective and child abuse whistleblower Maggie Oliver. Now, Maggie used to work for the Greater Manchester Police before resigning in 2012 over the Rochdale grooming scandal. Since then, Maggie has contributed to a TV dramatisation of the notorious case, as well as being involved in the making of a documentary detailing these crimes and setting up a foundation to support survivors. She'll be live here in the studio just after 5 o'clock. And in the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, is wind energy a viable option? Now, energy experts have said that the UK needs to improve the rate at which offshore wind turbines are installed so that the country can stop relying on energy imports. Now, that is according to research by Offshore Energies UK. And the government is in danger, apparently, though, of missing that target, which is in 2030. And basically, they want to quadruple the offshore renewable energy so that wind energy will potentially have a chance of maybe sustaining us here in the UK. But is it actually a realistic option? Can it really plug the energy gap? And at 10 to 5 in Worldview, after the passing of Mikhail Gorbachev, we'll go live to Russia. Gorbachev was the leader responsible for the dissolution of the USSR, and he played a huge part in ending the Cold War. Stay tuned, that's all on the way. Tell me what you think on everything we're discussing. You can email gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at gbnews. Now, of course, that story about the 77-year-old Margaret, I mean, this was in the Daily Telegraph today, and she waited for hours for an ambulance. Liam Williams, the Executive Director of Quality and Nursing at the Welsh Ambulance Service, said this: the Welsh Ambulance Service has experienced a growth in the number of life-threatening red calls, as well as significant and long-standing hospital handover delays, which have prevented us releasing resources to respond as quickly as we would want. And a spokesman for the IRIN, Bevan University Health Board, which runs the Grange Hospital where Miss Morgan passed away, said that on occasions when our own specialist clinicians are unavailable, patient scans that require expert analysis may be outsourced to specialist consultants external to the Health Board. This arrangement ensures that patient scans are reported on within required clinical timeframes. Reports carried out by all Wales outsourcing partners are usually returned within 2 hours of sending. Right, well, that's what they had to say. Let's see what my panellists have to say. Welcome to them. I've got consultant editor of the Daily Mail, Andrew Pearce, and former Liberal Democrat MP, Lembit Opik. Right, so, Andrew, I'm going to start with you. I mean, horrific story.
Shocking.
But the mess, the muddle of the whole system, it's all so fragmented.
Yeah, I hadn't read that story, but that was absolutely shocking. And the family must be beside themselves, because who knows, if they'd got there quicker, perhaps they could have saved her. But it's a fundamental failure. The NHS is getting record amounts of money, but it's not working, it's not functioning properly. And my heart sank when Boris Johnson came out of the NHS having had COVID, because I thought, now there's no chance of it ever being reformed. He's just going to throw even more money at it. But what it needs is root and branch reform, because it's not working, it's broken all over the place. And part of the problem is there are too many people in hospital beds who should be released into community care, into care homes, but we've got a crisis in social care too. And that's a big part of the problem.
Well, it's a part of the problem, but then also, if you look at it, we've had, 4 health ministers, or health secretaries, within 4 years. So who did we have first? It was Jeremy Hunt.
6 years.
And then we had... Who was
Matt Hancock.
Matt Hancock, he got... Well, you know what happened with him.
Yeah.
Matt Handy got...
Sajid Javid. Sajid Javid, and now Steve Barclay, who's about to get the push tomorrow.
Exactly. And so it'll be 5, obviously, because Liz Truss is not going to have Steve Barclay. I mean, this whole fragmentation, they want it done this way. Let's get rid of that. Let's change it here. Let's have more of this. I mean, it's just a mess.
The NHS saved my life more than once. I broke my back in 12 places, and they put me together again. I would have died if it hadn't been for the NHS. They kept my mum alive for probably an extra 15 years. Mm-hmm. So they do a lot of things right. But I think Andrew's touched on something really important. The system is designed to keep people who should be in care in hospital. And it's called bed blocking.
Yeah.
And the NHS is incentivised to get these people out of there, but the care homes aren't incentivised and often equipped to give the kind of attention these people need. Then the other 2 problems, you're never really going to save money on the NHS because you just get the emergency at an older age. So maybe life expectancy goes up to 85. You'll still get the emergencies then. So I'm sympathetic there. But what you said, Andrew, is right. There is this tremendous inefficiency in some parts of the NHS, not helped by this ridiculous multi-tiered consultancy approach to how the hospitals are run. And as you've said, Nana, in your opening commentary, how can people who have no experience in the health service run the health service? When I was Shadow Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, I went through half a dozen Secretaries of State. Mo Mowlam really knew what she was talking about. The rest of them were guessing. Maybe Peter Hain wasn't bad either. But with the NHS, it's a technical subject. So you put these people in who think they can be experts because they know about politics. I think Tony Benn once said to me that he wouldn't trust somebody who's flying a plane just because his father was in an air race in World War II. That's more or less the kind of logic we've got here. We should have experts who stick in the job instead of the musical chairs we get in Cabinet because people are ambitious.
Well, I was going to say as well, I mean, yes, the NHS probably saved my life too, but I was lucky. I think I got lucky because, I mean, it was a pregnancy. I had, eclampsia with HELLP syndrome, so liver, kidneys, everything failing. But luckily for me, I think because all my clinicians, first of all, I think one of the good things was that my clinicians were black, and that's not because they were black, but because they understood that I think our bodies are slightly different in terms of the level of what our blood pressures can take and all that kind of thing. And also the treatment I had, they probably knew about the pulse oximeters, which aren't so good on darker skin and things like that. So that saved my life. But the point of it is that the whole system is so fragmented that if you're lucky, then your life could be saved. And we can't really be running it on if you get lucky.
I know.
And that can't work. It can't be that way. And that was a long time ago, Limbit, as well.
Sorry to interrupt. I actually do have more sympathy for the NHS because I've been lucky, maybe my family's been lucky. They certainly saved the life of my first child when it was getting really tricky. I think the problem is the structure. The NHS, if it was allowed to be run by professional practitioners and it wasn't such a political football, could do a lot better. But it's back to the central point here. No one can lead the NHS just by being good at politics. You have to be a technical expert, and that's not what we're appointing in cabinets.
One thing Truss said in the leadership campaign, which I thought was interesting, the extra money that's been raised for the NHS through the increase in national insurance. I know she's going to reverse the national insurance rise, but it has raised several billion already. She said she's going to not give that to the NHS, she's going to put it into social care. So that's effectively a way of ending the bed blocking. And that could be quite significant because if the money goes to care homes, more care homes can open, more care homes have more room, and we can get the bed blockers out of the NHS. That could be a really significant step because that's part of the problem. Ambulances can't get backwards and forwards because they're waiting at a hospital for hours to discharge someone but there's no beds.
But also, the system was centralised, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So that was a problem as well, because it's a bit like, calling a taxi, say in Timbuktu, but asking them to give you directions to Essex or something like that. It doesn't really help. And I think that different ministers or different health secretaries have come up with different plans with their different departments, and they've said, we'll decentralise it, or we'll centralise it, or we'll do this, or we'll do that. And it's a bit like the education system as well. So you get a different education secretary who says, what we'll do is we'll have numbers 1 to 9. Those will be the grading. No, we'll have A to B. No, we'll have A star, A plus. And then in the end, nobody knows what they're doing. And it's so short term. The whole thing is...
That's the other point you made. Politicians operate in 5-year cycles. I remember thinking like that when I was an MP. Perhaps that was one of my downfalls, because I didn't think 2 elections ahead. Much worse, I wasn't running the country, luckily. Much worse when you've got a Secretary of State for Health who thinks, if I play this right, I might get to be Foreign Minister or Chancellor. And that's the game they play. Let's not forget the fact that there's been some crashing mistakes, even in the commentaries of our 2 would-be Prime Ministers. One of them mixed up the Black Sea with the Baltic Sea, for example. Oops!
Yes.
And these are the people who want to run the country and the world.
Yeah, the Russians weren't impressed.
This is happening because of the dogma you're inferring happens in politics and happens in the health service. And it's tragic.
And the Tories are scared. You see, they're scared to reform the NHS because they know that Labour will say the NHS is not safe in the Tories' hands. They're desperate to privatise it, even though most of the privatisation was started under Tony Blair. But they are scared, stiff, of taking on the NHS because of the fear that there'll be a backlash at the ballot box. But if they could only get to grips with it and reform it, there'd be a benefit at the ballot box again, because if the NHS works better, people are happier.
What do you think we could do, though, with regard to the political cycle? Because and the mindset of the politician who's only thinking for the 5 years.
This Prime Minister's not even going to be thinking 5 years. She's going to be thinking 2, because the next election is going to be in 2 years' time. That's the trouble.
I thought she was talking about potentially having it next year, though. I mean, it's like,
She could do.
Why would they do this? We need them to get on with running the country.
The word on the street is May 2024 at the moment. That's the guess. But whenever it is, maximum it can be is about 2 years.
Yeah.
Her problem is she's got to win that red wall. Boris got it because he's a good old boy you go for a pint with. Truss hasn't necessarily got that same charisma for that area. The short-termism, like you've just said, Andrew, is bound to play a part here. The long-term answer to your question, you could bring some kind of a rule in which you're liable for things you did 10 years earlier, but that's just not going to work. My view is, if you've got a really good Prime Minister who really knew what he or she is doing, she's going to say, I am going to put technical experts into technically demanding cabinet positions. So if you want to be the Minister for Defence, you don't just go in there because you're good in transport. If you want to be the Secretary of State for Health, you have to have leadership, strategic thinking, and some kind of a basis in health.
There are quite a few GPs on the Tory benches. Liam Fox, for instance, was a GP, but was never Secretary of State for Health. I couldn't understand it. They put him in the defence job. Why didn't they put him in health? It's crazy.
None of it makes much sense at all, and we end up being those who suffer as a result of it. But stay with us, because if you just joined me, welcome on board. It's coming up to 22 minutes after 4 o'clock. I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. Now, after the break, it's time for our Great British Debate this hour, and I'm asking, is wind energy a viable option? Send me your thoughts. You can email gbviews@gbnews.uk. Tell me what you think. You can also tweet me at GBNews. I've got a poll up right now asking you that question. Is wind energy a viable option? Cast your vote, but first let's get some weather.
This evening, the UK weather is looking unsettled as low pressure sits to the west of us, bringing in spells of rain. Let's take a look at the details. Southwest England will see further showers. Some could be heavy and perhaps thundery as well, turning windy for a time, especially around the coasts. Mostly dry across southeast England and London, with clear spells and generally light winds, the possibility of a few showers mainly in the north. An increasing risk of showery rain across southern parts of Wales this evening. This could be heavy in places and perhaps thundery too, turning windy. Mostly cloudy this evening across the Midlands, with an increasing risk of a few showers, which could be on the heavy side. Feeling quite humid with the temperatures around 19 Celsius and wind staying light. A mixed end to the day for north-east England. There will be the risk of a few showers, though most places should stay dry. Wind staying light with temperatures around 21 Celsius. A mainly dry evening for southern parts of Scotland, with plenty of clear spells and generally light winds. The risk of a few light showers, mainly in the east. A largely dry end to the day across Northern Ireland, with just some fair weather cloud around. A fairly low risk of an isolated shower later on around the coast. Overnight, bands of heavy rain and brisk winds will move northwards. A warm and muggy night with temperatures staying in double figures. And that's how the weather's shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. Over a drink, we have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
So good afternoon. It's coming up to 27 minutes after 4 o'clock. This is GB News. I'm Nana Akua. Welcome if you just joined me. Where have you been? Right, because it is time for our Great British Debate this out. Now, I'm asking you this because everyone's saying that wind energy, it gives us so much, but is it actually viable? Because I've heard a lot of other stories about the danger of the actual ecosystem around where those offshore farms are and the damage they cause to the fish and so on and so forth. But energy experts say that the UK needs to increase the rate at which they install these offshore turbines. And so the country can basically stop relying on energy imports. Now, Boris Johnson wanted to increase offshore wind capacity fourfold by 2030, but the industry figures say that the government has actually to slash planning delays if it wants to meet this target. So they set a target that currently, with the current legislation, is actually unachievable. There are about 2,500 offshore wind turbines in this country, and last year, wind generated about 12% of the UK's electricity. Nuclear, on the other hand, produced about 15%, and gas made up 40%. With the country heavily relying on gas imports, the UK exposes itself to shortages and price hikes, which is evidenced by the Russian invasion of Ukraine, although we don't actually get much from Russia. So is it time to start looking more at renewable options to help ease this current crisis? That's what I'm asking for the Great British Debate this hour. What do you think? Is wind energy a viable option? Well, I'm pleased to say that I'm joined by physicist and engineer Brian Catt. Brian, OK, so the UK, do you actually believe they've come up with this 2030 figure? Do you think that we can reach the target? And even if we did, would it be realistic?
Well, to spend any money on renewables at the moment, when you could be spending it on gas and nuclear development, i.e. fracking gas to power, to provide a sovereign energy reserve that we can control the price of, is a daft idea. And the simple reason is that renewables are a weak, disorganised energy source. It's a very weak energy source. You need a huge amount of resources to collect it. And it's intermittent, so half the time it's not there, which means you have to match it 100% with gas anyway. So you're not saving anything, you're doubling up, you're duplicating.
But these wind turbines, they're saying that this will, at the moment, it's what, 12% or something?
Yep.
Is it realistic to consider that they could get, we could get quite a lot of energy out of them? And if you were going to get energy, would you use them as a practical source to do that?
The point about wind energy is that you can put it up fairly quickly, short term, and when it's working, it's useful and contributes to the grid. The problem is, if it isn't working, what are you going to do? So you're not really saying you're doubling your generation. So well, the other point about this, of course, is it costs a lot more. So yes, Boris will want to do this because it's making fortunes for his friends. They're all invested in this, in the companies that build the windmills that are given the subsidies. So they're making billions. At the moment, the cost of wind farm subsidies is about £8 billion per annum.
Oh, right. So you get subsidised.
And that's going into their pockets of the rich and the
well, but they may not necessarily be Boris's friends, we'll just put that out there. But yes, the point is that you're saying that the subsidies for wind energy make it an appealing option for those who want to invest in it, yet it may not actually produce that much energy. And if you worked out the cost-to-return ratio, you're actually spending more than the return.
Yeah, I meant Carrie's friends, sorry.
You meant Carrie's friends, not... By the way, you meant Carrie's friends. So either way, we can't be sure.
Yeah.
So, OK, so these turbines themselves, because as I understand it, they cause quite a lot of damage to the environment that they're in. So in the sea, when they're in the sea, what do we know about the sort of damage they cause to the...
I am absolutely unaware and not able to answer that. What I do know is that they're killing off bald eagles in America. They kill off a massive amount of bats and birds, but my expertise is in energy, it's not in the environment.
If you were going to harness, so wind energy harnesses electricity, right? If you were going to harness electricity, would this be a sensible use of resource to do that?
No, the best way to spend money, our money, which we have to pay for all this, OK? Yeah. The best way to do that is to get gas turbine powered generation built, which takes 2 years to get online. and frack the gas to put in it. We can put imported gas into it to start with, which is expensive, but at least it keeps the lights on. And as soon as fracked gas becomes available, then we can run it on the sovereign, and the prices should come right down if the government takes control of the prices of our gas.
All right. Well, let's see what Angela Knight thinks of this. She's the former head of Energy UK and former Treasury Minister. Angela, you heard what Brian says. It doesn't sound like wind is that great an option, but what's your take on it?
Well, it has always been the case that every time you build a quantum of renewable energy, whether it is wind or whether it's solar, whether it's onshore, whether it's offshore, because it's intermittent, you've got to have that same amount of power available on a backup, which you can just switch on, or some form of continuous baseload. And I think that the mistake that has been made by this country, and indeed by other countries over the years, is somehow forgetting that you needed to have that backup as well. And so your guest is absolutely right, that if I want to have a certain amount of power that's produced from an offshore wind farm, I've got to have that same amount of power available for when that wind doesn't blow. There are longer-term propositions, but we're just not got there yet. Storing of electricity in one form or another, we're not really there. The most likely option, I suspect, will be to use surplus wind when it is surplus to electrolyse water and produce hydrogen, and then you can burn that hydrogen in power stations. But yeah, there has to be a rational, proper, scientific and engineering discussion on how much we're prepared to spend and where. I personally favour the small-scale nuclear power stations. They can be built quickly. They're a repeatable design. What's more, you can get external investment because your costs are down to about $2 billion. Now, $2 billion is a lot of money, but everything's a lot of money here. I would also run a proper experiment on fracking. It is controversial, and that's why I would say, OK, we understand the controversy there, but what we're going to do is we're going to do this under controlled scientific conditions, because at the moment the whole debate on fracking is emotional, and to a certain extent the debate on wind is emotional, because wind is free, we've got it, you can put up these windmills, they are subsidised, that's right, but sort of most things around are subsidised at the moment in energy, one route or another, and therefore, it's got to be the right way to go. But it isn't. It's a more complicated discussion than that. And that is that more complicated discussion we need to have. And if I could just say one more thing, I think in your earlier part of your programme, you had one of your guests saying that anyone who was, the cabinet minister in charge of health should have something about health in their background. And the same with defence. I agree that it is actually the same with energy, that you need to have somebody there who has at least got some background in science, some background in engineering. Otherwise, they're coming in with a history degree or a PPE degree, and they're a long way on the mark.
Useless. Yeah, well, listen, Angela, very useful. And that, we all know that. I don't know why they don't. Angela Knight, thank you very much. She's the former head of Energy UK and former Treasury Minister. I'm going to give you the last word, Brian. We've got about 30 seconds, so give us your final summary on wind.
I agree with most of that. Hydrogen from wind. Hydrogen is not a very good idea because it's very explosive. It leaks.
We know about that because of that space shuttle.
Storage. Lembit was absolutely right. And Carl Sagan, if you look up Carl Sagan's last interview and see what he said about people's ignorance about science and the effect, in that case, who's running the country. $2 billion is not a lot of money. An offshore wind farm will cost you about $4 billion per gigawatt.
So basically, it's not that cost-effective. Brian Catt, thank you so much. Thank you so much. That is Brian Catt. I might try and force him to stay for the actual debate. You're with me. I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. Now, after the break, we will continue with our debate. I'm asking, is wind energy a viable option? But first, let's get your latest news headlines.
Thank you, Nana. It's 4:35. I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB newsroom. 2 men have been arrested in connection with the death of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell in Liverpool. A 34-year-old has been arrested on suspicion of murder and attempted murder. Meanwhile, a 41-year-old from Knowsley has been arrested on suspicion of assisting an offender. Olivia died nearly 2 weeks ago after she was shot in her home. Some breaking news now, and GB News can report that the number of people crossing the English Channel in small boats has now passed 27,000 this year. Around 1,000 migrants have crossed over today. The number of people making the journey has increased in recent days as weather conditions in the Channel improved. Liz Truss is defending her plans to cut the national insurance rise a day before the Conservative Party announces the next Prime Minister. Speaking on the BBC's Sunday with Laura Coombsberg programme, she said it was reasonable that the wealthiest received the biggest benefit. Meanwhile, appearing on the same programme, Rishi Sunak said if he becomes Prime Minister, he can't rule out introducing electricity blackouts due to rising prices. The Home Secretary says the Met Police must learn from the appalling mistakes of the past. Writing to the Force's new Commissioner, Priti Patel stressed the need to restore trust and confidence in the Force. It follows a number of high-profile scandals, including the murder of Sarah Everard by a serving officer. A man has been arrested following an incident that killed an 18-year-old woman and her 8-year-old twin siblings in Dublin. The three were taken to Children's Health Ireland in Crumlin, but were all pronounced dead. Another 14-year-old boy also received serious injuries, which are not believed to be life-threatening. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere, Nana's back soon.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good afternoon. It's coming up to 40 minutes after 4 o'clock. This is GB News. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. Now, we're going to return to our Great British Debate this hour, and I'm asking, what do you think? Is wind energy a viable option? Now, a lot of these energy experts have said that the UK should increase the rate at which offshore wind turbines are installed so that the country can stop relying on energy imports. Now, last year, offshore wind energy generated around about 12% of the UK's electricity. Nuclear produced about 15%, whilst gas made up 40%. But there are concerns that the environmental impacts of wind turbines, including the potential to degrade habitats, are an issue. So for our debate this hour, I'm asking, is wind energy a viable option? Let's see what my panel make of that. I'm joined by consultant editor of the Daily Mail, Andrew Pearce, and also former Liberal Democrat MP, Lembit Opik. I have to come to Lembit Opik first because there's no climate emergency. That's what he always says. Wind energy, is it all a bit of a joke? I mean, it does produce something, it's useful, but is the payback?
In some circumstances, it can be useful. Remote environments where you have for example, decent storage, and I don't mean lithium-ion batteries, that's a terrible use of resources. Something called sodium salt batteries can do it. So sometimes it works. But the idea that we can power our national grid and the baseload, that's the minimum you always need. Why are you laughing at me?
Well, I'm just thinking that if the wind stops, the lights go out.
It's worse than that. If the wind stops, you've got a high pressure, which is really cold in the winter, and it's night time. You have to do what Brian Katz said, and Angela Knight as well, who I'm glad to say sees the technical importance of having informed politicians on this. You have to have what's called spinning reserve, the same amount from somewhere else. Otherwise, lights go out. I can't believe Rishi Sunak saying he's willing to have blackouts. He's talking about it for pricing purposes, but you don't need to worry about the pricing, because if the grid runs out of power, then the lights go out anyway. It's insane, Nana. You cannot run a first world country with wind and solar, and you can't do it anywhere in the world, actually. We can't make nuclear quickly because it takes 30 or 40 years to get the agreement, maybe 20 if you're lucky. You can do gas, but we're too scared to take it out of the ground because of the nutty green lobbyists who tell you that there's a climate emergency, and guess what? There isn't.
OK, right, but Rishi...
Had to get there in the end.
I knew it. But Rishi Sunak would say that because he's very rich and he won't have a blackout, even if we all do. But what do you think?
Look, I just think this pursuit to net zero is madness. It's insanity. It's unrealistic. We've got oil fields, billions of gallons of oil still in the North Sea. Get it out. We should be using that, and we should... I mean, offshore wind turbines are fine if you're going to have them, but we don't want them on the countryside because they're destroying the environment. And yes, if it's not windy, they don't work. And then sometimes, if they're really working flat out, they can't harness the excess energy either. They can't store it. So wind energy is a joke. So I'm afraid we've got to... Blair and Brown have got as much to blame as this because they had no energy policy when they were in power. There was no nuclear policy. Germany made the same mistake. We've got to get on with nuclear, but as Lemit says, it takes a long time. But in the short term, let's talk about fracking and let's talk about getting some oil out of the ground.
I'd go further. I'd open the coal mines as well.
Yep.
I'd take it all. I just don't... As much as, you know, this whole CO2 thing, this whole net zero thing, I'm sorry, but I'm just not...
And there's a coal mine behind the Red Wall that Boris Johnson was going to agree to give the go-ahead, and then he wasn't going to give the go-ahead. Get it going.
But to cut the things, my father was a nuclear physicist, so in my teens I was obviously against nuclear physics because you have to oppose your father. Yeah. When I got older, and I was Shadow Minister for Energy for the Lib Dems, I said, I'm going to look at this for 2 years. I had to change my view. My dad was right all along, because nuclear power, notwithstanding the problems you get in conflict zones like in Ukraine, nuclear power is profoundly safe if you look at the overall number of deaths from that. But the thing is, it's dead reliable. It doesn't need sunshine, it doesn't need wind. And this coal point that you've both inferred, the reason I say there's no climate crisis is because literally, and this sounds counterintuitive to some of your viewers, there is no way that CO2 can be wrecking our climate. Just no way. It's 0.04% of our atmosphere, of which we add 3.5%. Now think about that. That's 1/33 of 1/400th of our climate, of our atmosphere. That's not affecting it, but that's the reason we've got these balmy policies. That's why we're not taking £1 trillion worth of gas from under our feet, and we're giving the economic initiative to Russia, India and China, who have no intention at all of following our crazy lead.
No, they're not.
Well, what's your take on the whole CO2 thing? Do you think that it's do you think that it is impacting the environment in the manner that they're saying, or do you think that
Britain is a tiny producer. I mean, China is... all this stuff is being belched in China and America and Brazil. Britain is a tiny producer. We just got to stop this obsession with green. Cameron began it. Go Tory, go blue, go green or something. And Boris embraced it, I'm afraid. Liz Truss, I hope, breath of fresh air, new approach, abandon net zero. There'll be a huge house of protest from the Labour Party and some of her own side, but she's got to do it if we're going to start being sufficient in our own energy.
Can I ask Andrew a question? Do you think there are any votes in it at all for the Tories to take this green agenda? Because I've never seen that. No. I don't think Greens will start voting Conservative. You agree with that?
Never.
They should just stop it. You know, it feels like someone's plucked a figure out of the air. 2030 we'll do that. Then 2040, 50 for that, and 20. Yeah. What is the science behind those set dates? Seeing as they supposedly have some sort of science to show that carbon is the reason why we're having this global warming. What is the science? Why have they picked 2030?
Well, I can tell you.
What's the reasoning?
Where did they get that?
Well, I work with a group called Transport Reality because I work with the Motorcycle Action Group, so once again declare an interest there. But I look at this professionally. It's made up gesture politics, virtue signalling by politicians who are completely ignorant, as far as I can see, of the actual science of climatology. All of this comes from 1896, a guy called Svante Arrhenius, who came up with the idea that CO2 drives climate. It was interesting work for the time, but it was wrong. That's what's driving our climatology policies.
But so many people are convinced that that is the way it is. So there could be some truth in it. I don't know. I'm not an expert in there. But I'm using my common sense. I understand that we, as a global, giver out of CO2, are responsible for such a tiny fraction of it that I can't really see how that can be something that would literally tip the balance of this Earth and change the climate. Is climate not something that is almost unpredictable, just like, well, the weather? They can't even get that right.
I'm on a bit of a roll now. We're going to continue on this. To give you an idea of how much CO2 human beings put into the climate, it's like taking a single measure of gin and putting it into 8,000 litres of tonic every year. You're not going to be able to taste that.
You're going to get drunk straight away.
And the second thing is, the science is settled on this. Human-generated CO2 simply cannot be driving the climate. There's something called logarithmic forcing, all kinds of technical things you don't hear because it's a bit boring to talk about the science. I have never, ever met anyone on GBNews or anywhere else where the green argument has been able to defeat the hard science.
Well, Andrew, I'm going to give the final word to you on that. Your view on all of this, I mean...
we know... I think we've got a clue where she is coming from on this, Liz Truss, because we know one of the things she's going to do in the cost of living crisis is remove that green levy in our electric and gas bill temporarily for a year. To help with the cost of living crisis. That's a sign that she doesn't think it's... Now, Labour are going to oppose that, and some of her own side will oppose it. I think that's a sign. I think she's just got to go a lot further.
She's got to go a lot further. Well, listen, this show's nothing without you and your views. Let's welcome our great British voice onto the show. Your chance to tell us what you think about the topics we're discussing. Right, where should we go to? Should we go to Milton Keynes?
Great choice.
Yeah,
Great choice.
They love squares and rectangles there. It's like the home of the roundabout. Hello, Dr. Seshni Mulia-Rensburg. Seshni, what do you think about this? First of all, do you believe that carbon dioxide is the reason why the Earth and planet is warming up?
Hello, Nana, and hello, everyone. Yes, that's an interesting discussion, Nana. I don't think that it's just the carbon dioxide. I agree with what you were saying and the others as well, the other panelists. We need more evidence to find out why the climate issues are the way it is and whether it's, what they're saying is because of the carbon dioxide.
What is your view then with the wind turbines? Do you think they're quite a good way forward? I mean, they give us about, what is it, 12% now, but we've got a target at which how many we need to have created, which the target we can't reach anyway. Do you think they're a viable, valid option?
I think there are pros and cons to wind energy, and we're all becoming experts now in energy, with every household looking at how to reduce costs. So it is something that I'm interested in. And yes, I think, as I agree with the panelists, that whilst wind energy can be used, it may be cost effective, it may be a cleaner form of energy, it might create even jobs, but in the long term, in the medium, short, and the immediate solution to the current energy crisis, I don't think it's something that we can rely on. I think we need to think about insulating our homes, but I understand there is a drive now for use of wind energy and solar panel energy as well.
Thank you very much, Seshni. Really good to talk to you. That's Dr. Seshni Mulia-Rensburg. She's actually our great British voice. She's there in Milton Keynes. Well, today I've been asking you, and lots of you have been getting in touch. What do you think? Lucas says we should use a bit of everything. We need to be more versatile. I agree with you, a bit of everything, which includes coal and gas. Liz says wind turbines surely have to be a part of the future energy. Yes, they should be a part of it, but they shouldn't be the main part. Thomas says no wind means no energy. How is that viable? Well, that is a very good point, and we have mentioned that. Alan says wind and solar are decades away from being able to provide the energy to support a growing, robust country. And Stephen says, in my opinion, tidal energy is much better. It's completely predictable and it's the same every day. Well, I've got a poll up right now on Twitter as well throughout the show, asking you the question whether you think wind energy is a viable option. Currently, 76% of you say yes, 24% of you say no. You're with me, I'm Nana Akua. This is GBNews on TV, online and on digital radio. After the break, World View. We'll be going live to Russia to discuss the passing and legacy of Mikhail Gorbachev with a journalist in Moscow. But first, let's have a break.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. Over a drink, we have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
This is GB News. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. It is time now, though, for World View, and today we're crossing over to Russia. As the last leader of the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev, passed away earlier this week, aged 91. Gorbachev was responsible for the dissolution of the USSR and played a huge part in ending the Cold War. Gorbachev was also known for having a good relationship with the West. And to discuss this, I'm joined by Russian journalist and author Alex Ryasov. He's there in Russia. Now, Alex, it was Mikhail Gorbachev's funeral yesterday. What is the mood like in Russia since his death?
Well, Nana, you viewers might be surprised because Gorbachev is absolutely admired in the West. In Russia, though, his reputation is the exact opposite. You know, preparing for this interview, I spoke to my grandfather, and he said his only regret about Gorbachev's death is that he didn't live long enough to see his own trial. And you know, in Russia, a lot of people actually believe that Gorbachev is a criminal for allowing the Soviet Union to collapse. It's obviously much more complicated than that.
Wow, that's a shock. I really wasn't expecting you to say that. So his legacy then, what will his legacy be then for most of the Russians? If you're saying a lot of Russian people don't actually see him as a unifier. I mean, there's perestroika, there was all these wonderful things that he supposedly achieved as we perceive it in the West. But how will he then be remembered? What would his legacy be there?
Well, obviously, it's not black and white because there are still some people in Russia who genuinely admire Gorbachev for his liberal reforms, because after all, he attempted to reform the country. I believe, though, in politics, often there are no right or wrong decisions. There are decisions that are implemented to the fullest, and there are those that are not. The problem with Gorbachev is that he was a man of half measures. You see, he tried to reform the Soviet economy, but instead of building a well-functioning capitalist system, he just tried to revive the socialist economy, because he was a socialist after all. And people blame him for the collapse of the Soviet Union. Well, Gorbachev, he actually tried to save the country. He was one of the last men who fought till the end to save the Soviet Union. You know, when there were nationalist uprisings in Azerbaijan, in Georgia, in Lithuania, Gorbachev actually sent the tanks to suppress the rebellion. But again, the problem is that once it got too intense, he pulled back the troops. If it was someone else at his place, like not a man of half measures, there would probably be so much more blood. So probably it's good it was Gorbachev. And again, like we can't actually blame him for anything without walking a mile in his shoes, because, well, who else was at his place? It was no one else. It was Gorbachev. But again, Russians, they blame him, they judge him for the collapse of the Soviet Union. And, actually, in 1996, Gorbachev, he ran for the president of Russia after the collapse, 5 years after the collapse of the Soviet Union. He got less than 1%. So that's probably still his approval rating in Russia.
Well, interesting. Alex, listen, it's really good to talk to you. Really good to hear your view and your perspective in Russia. That's Alex Beryosov. He's a Russian journalist. And also, I'm going to take that to my panel. Joining me, Andrew Pearson, also Lembe Opik. I was actually quite surprised to hear that. I thought that they'd say that he was great.
Well, the thing is, under the old Soviet Union, everybody got fed. Everybody had a job. And then, of course, when the Soviet Union disintegrated, because it was just falling apart, they didn't get the same. And, of course, war criminal, the terrible man that Putin is, he thinks that the collapse of the Soviet Union was the greatest act of national harm that ever befell the Russian people.
Three things. First of all, I was actually involved in the attempted quelling of the Baltic states. I went there when the tanks were kind of hanging around. It was a scary time. And the reason, second point, Gorbachev did that is because he lost control. This thing called perestroika and glasnost, which we haven't got time to explain now, was, as Alex just said, Gorbachev's attempt to restart the Soviet economy, but he lost control of it, and that's why it collapsed. Third thing, I didn't get on well with Gorbachev myself. I had to host dinner for him one time in Parliament, which I suppose is a pretty big name drop. As soon as he realised that I was Estonian, he wouldn't give me a spit. Wouldn't pass the time of day with me. He'd rather speak to the supreme allied commander of NATO who's sitting opposite him, who had 600 megatons of bombs pointing towards Moscow, than to speak to me. So
he's a racist.
I felt he was very uncomfortable with me physically being there. On the other hand, and you shouldn't meet your heroes, because until then I thought actually he was quite an impressive guy.
But he didn't actually say anything, though. You just felt that.
No, he actually refused to be photographed with me and walked off the stand when we were all being photographed together. It was unpleasant.
It doesn't sound great.
Not a great liberal, is he, that we thought?
Well, well, I'm shocked, you're shocked, we're all shocked. Right, separately now, we wanted to go and get an update from Ukraine as the war continues. Kira Ruddock is the Ukrainian MP and the People's Deputy of Ukraine, and she joins me now. Kira, thank you so much for joining me on the programme. What's the current situation and state of conflict in Ukraine?
Well, we are in the situation where there is not much news, and we and our army are trying to push Russians as far as possible from our territories till the winter hits. You see, it's the beginning of September, and I'm already wearing a sweater because the weather is getting harder and harder here, and we know that at some point it will be almost impossible to fight. By that point, we need to use all our resources, all the weapons that we are getting to push Russians back as much as possible. And this is what our army is concentrated on. There has been reports on potential counteroffensive, but we did not receive any additional evidence supporting that. So the fighting continues, and our army is on a long stretch in getting Russians out of Kherson, which is one of the major cities that was taken at the beginning of the war. For the rest of the country, we are getting ready for the winter. The issue is that so many Ukrainians has lost their homes and continue losing their homes due to the shelling, and we are unable to repair and rebuild it as quickly as it is needed. And if right now people are able to live in the temporary homes, again, when the winter hits, when the weather conditions will be tough, it will be almost impossible for them to survive. This is why every single day right now is dedicated to get warm and heated places for as many people as possible, because we know that this autumn and winter will be for us incredibly hard. I would say life or death hard. And this is why we are so thankful for all the support that we are getting from the Great Britain. And we do hope that even the hardships of the energy crisis will not stop this support. In fact, there is a way that I have been telling to the British politicians and that I'm pushing on right now is to use frozen Russian assets to cover for the energy crisis and for the support that is being given to Ukraine. It's been $500,000 billion right now in the UK of their confiscated Russian assets. So we need to unfreeze those and use those money. There is no time to wait. There is an ability right now to make this crisis less hard on people, both in the United Kingdom and in Ukraine.
So much for giving us that message. It's, we wish you, we really, we want to see an end to this war. And, anybody watching now, we all feel for those in Ukraine as well. Kira Radek, thank you so much for joining us. She's a Ukrainian MP and the People's Deputy of Ukraine. Thank you so much. This is GB News. I'm Nana Akua. More to come in the next hour. This is coming up to 2 minutes after 5 o'clock. I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. And for the next 2 hours, me and my panel will be taking on some of the top stories hitting the headlines right now. Still to come. My special guest in Outside is former detective and child abuse whistleblower Maggie Oliver. Now, Maggie used to work for the Greater Manchester Police Force before resigning in 2012 over the Rochdale grooming scandal. And in the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking which three issues should the new Prime Minister tackle first? All that and more coming up in the next hour. But first, let's get your latest news headlines.
Good afternoon. It's 2 minutes past 5. I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB newsroom. 2 men have been arrested in connection with the death of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell in Liverpool. A 34-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of murder and attempted murder in connection. Meanwhile, a 41-year-old man from Knowsley has been arrested on suspicion of assisting an offender. Olivia died nearly 2 weeks ago after she was shot in her home by an unknown gunman. GB News can report that the number of people crossing the English Channel in small boats has passed 27,000 this year. Around 1,000 migrants have crossed over today. The number of crossings has increased in the last 2 days as weather conditions in the Channel improved. The migrants have been picked up by Border Force officers and taken for processing. Liz Truss is defending her plans to cut the national insurance rise a day before the next Prime Minister is announced. Speaking on the BBC's Sunday with Laura Koonsberg programme, she refused to be drawn on her plans to help struggling families, but said she'll reveal them within a week of winning the post. She also said it was reasonable that the wealthiest received the biggest benefit from any cut to national insurance.
It is fair. We promised in our manifesto that we would not raise national insurance. I opposed the decision to raise it in Cabinet because it was the wrong decision. I believe it is the right
thing.
thing.
You could have quit if you felt that strongly.
Well, I could, but I preferred to stay in and fight my corner because I'm not somebody who quits.
Meanwhile, speaking on the same programme, Rishi Sunak said if he becomes Prime Minister, he can't rule out introducing electricity blackouts due to rising energy prices.
Well, what I've said is that we shouldn't rule anything out. I mean, we're facing a genuine emergency. I think anyone pretending that that isn't the situation isn't being straight with the country. And by the way, across Europe, those plans are being drawn up. And I would imagine
we should prepare for blackouts, do you think?
Well, as I said, again, I'm not there. I'm not inside. But what I would say is we shouldn't rule anything out because the situation is serious.
Boris Johnson is urging the Tory party to back the next Prime Minister wholeheartedly, regardless of who wins. Writing in the Sunday Express, Mr Johnson praised the abilities of both candidates, saying it was time to put the national interest first. The outgoing Prime Minister also described his last 3 years in charge as tough but exhilarating. The Home Secretary says the Met Police must learn from the appalling mistakes of the past. Writing to the Force's new Commissioner, Priti Patel stressed the need to restore trust and confidence in the Force. It follows a number of high-profile scandals, including the murder of Sarah Everard by a serving officer. However, former Met Detective Chief Superintendent Kevin Hurley told us Priti Patel is simply trying to appear tough.
This is a cynical last gasp of a failing Home Secretary trying to prove she's strong in the hope that Suella Braverman doesn't get the job. So what it's actually done is demonstrated yet another one of her failings because it's made us a little bit less safe. All it's done is given the men and women in the front line serving us right now another kicking to further demoralise them.
A man has been arrested following an incident that killed an 18-year-old woman and her 8-year-old twin siblings in Dublin. The three were taken to Children's Health Island in Crumlin, but were all pronounced dead. Another 14-year-old boy also received serious injuries, which are not believed to be life-threatening. A man in his early 20s was arrested at the scene, and police are not looking for anyone else in connection with the incident. The Disaster Emergency Committee has received £13.5 million in donations to help people affected by the floods in Pakistan. Record monsoon rains and melting glaciers caused the humanitarian disaster. Flooding has now killed over 1,200 people and 33 million are affected. A third of Pakistan is estimated to be underwater. That's an area equivalent to the size of the UK. Former President Donald Trump has described the FBI and the US Justice Department as vicious monsters. It comes after authorities searched Mr. Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate last month. They say they found more than 11,000 government records, including some marked top secret and classified. President Trump made the comments during a campaign rally in Pennsylvania.
The FBI and the Justice Department have become vicious monsters, controlled by radical left scoundrels, lawyers, and the media who tell them what to do, you people right there, and when to do it.
This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Nana.
It's just gone 7 minutes after 5 o'clock. This is GB News. I'm Nana Akua. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. And for the next hour, me and my panel will be taking on some of those big topics hitting the headlines right now. This show is all about opinion. It's mine, it's theirs, and of course it's yours. We'll be debating, discussing it. At times we will disagree, but no one will be cancelled. Now, still to come each Sunday at 5 o'clock, I'm joined by a celebrity, a former MP, or someone who's had an extremely interesting career to take a look at life after the job. We talk highs, lows and lessons learnt and what comes next on the outside. And today, my special guest is former detective and whistleblower Maggie Oliver. Now, Maggie used to work for the Greater Manchester Police before resigning in 2012 over the Rochdale grooming scandal. She'll be here in the studio in a moment's time. And in the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking which three issues would you like to see the new Prime Minister tackle first? The new Prime Minister is facing crises on almost every front. We've got rising energy bills, we've got a war in Ukraine. It's just, I mean, I don't envy the next person taking over. Millions are still waiting for NHS treatment. And of course, we've got the situation with illegal migrants crossing the Channel. But which three issues would you like to see the new Prime Minister tackle? And Shamima Begum is back in the news. But should she be allowed to back in the UK? We're discussing that in our mini debate. Email me your thoughts, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet me at gbnews. Right, so now it's time for Outside. And now this week, I'm joined by a former police detective, Maggie Oliver. Now, you might have caught her on yesterday's show, and today we're lucky that she's here live in the studio. Now, Maggie used to work for the Greater Manchester Police before dramatically resigning in 2012 over the Rochdale grooming scandal. 9 men were convicted over a series of sexual offences against teenage girls in the Rochdale area during the investigation. Now, during that time, 47 vulnerable youngsters were said to have been victims of the child sexual exploitation ring. And since that time, Maggie has contributed to a television dramatisation of the notorious case, as well as being involved in the making of a documentary detailing those heinous crimes. And in a bid to help those who have suffered at the hands of abusers, the former detective set up the Maggie Oliver Foundation with the prime aim of transforming the victim's pain into power. And I'm very pleased to say that Maggie joins me now in the studio. Maggie, thank you so much for joining me. Wow, you've had an amazing, an interesting and full-on life. Well, talk to me about, first of all, your work when you were in the police. What was that like? Because you were a detective, which is quite a high...
Yeah, I loved my job. I mean, people who don't know my story, and anybody who wants to can read about my secrets in my book. But I joined the police when I was 41. You know, I was a bit long in the tooth. I'd got 4 kids. I was married. And for my sins, I joined the police to make a difference. I was posted to Moss Side, which was a complete shock to I was seen as a middle-class woman. I'd lived in a nice house, not really come into contact with crime. And suddenly I'm like running around and dealing with gangs and drugs, and I was in major crime. I didn't go into child protection, but I loved my job, and I became a family liaison officer. I worked on kidnappings, I worked on gang-related murders. I went to Jamaica on another murder. I had a fantastic career, and I was good at what I did. Don't put me on CCTV and don't put me on telephones, but you give me a vulnerable person, you give me an ordinary person or a child who had been abused or a woman who'd been subjected to domestic violence. I understood people. And I wanted to do the right thing. I was always honest. And then in 2004, my husband was terminally ill, and I was asked to go on a job called Operation Augusta. That was my first introduction to grooming gangs and what I've become known for. But I've had a really full life that, I want women to know that there are lots of different chapters to their life, but my career was central. My kids are the most important part. What I saw on Operation Augusta, though, was dozens and dozens of very vulnerable children being raped, not groomed, raped on a daily basis by gangs of very sophisticated paedophiles. Greater Manchester Police, I worked for GMP, and we had a database with over 100 men on that database that we knew were abusing those children. We had professionals, social workers, who had been crying out for the police to do something for years. I worked on that job for well over a year, and then my husband was terminally ill. I went off work to look after him in his last couple of months. When I came back to work, that job had been buried. Not one man was prosecuted for rape. The children had been left high and dry, and those men free to abuse generations of other children. I'm skipping through this very quickly, but in 2020, after I had repeatedly gone on about this gross criminal neglect, Andy Burnham put together an independent review. That review reported that GMP officially closed that investigation down because
GMP,
Greater Manchester Police, because they wouldn't put resources in. They've now been forced to reopen that. I saw the same failures, though, in 2010 and 11 with Operation Span in Rochdale, and we have just had the new Chief Constable admit to organisational incompetence in dealing with the way those children were again failed. So seeing that and knowing what was going on, I was faced really with two choices: either stay in my job and remain silent. I spent 18 months within the job trying to be heard, going from head of public protection, chief constable, home office. Nobody wanted to hear. I was threatened with prison, but I felt that I had to stand up for what I believed in. And for me, the most important job that police officers do is protect the vulnerable. And here we had a cover-up on a monumental basis. I didn't know at the beginning, Nana, that this was going on all through the country. I was so naive that I thought it was perhaps one lazy officer. I know very different now, and our work in the Maggie Oliver Foundation shows me that this is still going on today. The authorities are still not dealing with it properly. It is no longer just grooming gang victims that are being failed, though, because we are dealing with victims of sexual abuse that are not victims of grooming gangs. And, I've seen an article today that says that more than a third of police officers have got less than 5 years service, and we've got a crisis in policing. We've got a criminal justice system that has fallen apart. We've got delays in getting to court for the most vulnerable victims of up to 5 years. And so this kind of issue has followed me through my life. And now I've got a real great team alongside me, but we've got an awful lot of work to do.
Maggie, how did you blow the whistle then on it? What did you do?
What happened was I went into work, and anybody who's watched Three Girls, I was the programme consultant on that. And the two of the girls represented in there, Amber and Ruby, were my girls. And I spent months gaining their trust and getting them to spend hours and hours giving video interviews, going to ID parades, on the absolute guarantee that their abusers would be taken to court. They were willing to go to court. On a Friday afternoon, I turned up at work to be told that they were no longer going to use Amber. Instead, they chose to put her on the indictment as one of the gang of paedophiles. She had been abused from the age of 15. She had never been arrested, never been cautioned, had no legal advice, and they did that secretly in a way, the only way to get her evidence into court, because they had dropped her as a victim. We also had young Ruby, who had been made pregnant at 12. Police had illegally, in my opinion, seized the fetus, locked it away in a freezer, where it remained for 2 years. When I was taken onto that job, I was asked if I would tell the family that we had it, get their consent to use it to get DNA, and then we could prosecute the man who got her pregnant for rape. I saw her abuser charged with sexual activity with a child by the Crown prosecutor made that decision. The man who got her pregnant was out of prison in less than 4 years. He wasn't charged with rape. He is now walking around the streets of Rochdale. So those things to me are not justice. Amber had been demonised by the court as a tactic, and I quote, a tactical option. It almost destroyed her life. And I felt guilty and responsible, even though actually I had nothing to be guilty for, because I had done what I was asked to do by the Chief Constable, by senior police officers, because this was the biggest case that Greater Manchester Police were dealing with. And I spent months at home going from pillar to post because I couldn't make any sense of it, Nana. What I was seeing was not justice. It was not what I joined the police to do. And ultimately, when every door was slammed in my face, I had two choices. You know, either stay in your job, get your wage, go home and turn a blind eye, or resign and go public. Now, when I said that I was not going to be silenced, I wanted this dealing with, and if the police were not going to deal with it, then I was going to go public. I truly feared I would go to prison. It made me so ill. I ended up my last day at work unconscious on the floor. I lost my home, I lost my career, I lost my income. I actually almost lost my mental health. And I had the Chief Constable responding to I did file on 4, where the victims spoke out, I spoke out, and I had the Chief Constable going on national TV and in the national media saying that I was this woman who was, I'd been bereaved because my husband had died. I'd kind of lost the plot because of that. I became too emotionally involved. But something inside me would not let this go. And I always say that I was watching on the TV all the Hillsborough families who had fought for 30 years to have the truth told. And I knew that I didn't want my children to turn the TV on in 30 years' time and see Operation Span, the Rochdale grooming case, and say, well, my mum worked on that. Why did she not say anything? So I made the impossible decision to resign in order to speak the truth. Now, I didn't know where that journey would lead to. But it kind of has followed me. And once I began to speak out, victims were coming out of the woodwork, coming to me on my social media.
That's frightening, isn't it?
It's terrifying, but they're not on their own now, Nana.
Well, they're not, because you set up the foundation.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a bit about the foundation?
Yeah, I mean, that came from me not being able to cope. I thought it'd be dead easy to start a charity. it wasn't easy. And that was 3 years ago. But now I've gone from just me. I've got 5 fantastic members of staff. We've got an army of 30 volunteer ambassadors, 65% of them who are survivors. We offer emotional support to survivors who need help, but we also offer legal advocacy for those who are having the door slammed in their face. So if anybody's listening who feels alone and isolated, fobbed off by the authorities, blamed, judged, lonely, please come to the Maggie Oliver Foundation, because we are there to help and we will change this world. And I do want to see a chief constable in a court of law charged with gross criminal neglect and misconduct in a public office. And I'm not dying until they are.
Maggie Oliver, it's been a pleasure to talk to you. You've got your book there.
Oh, here's my book. That's for you. That is happy holiday reading. And if anybody wants it, they can get it on Amazon.
Maggie Oliver, Fighting for Justice Survivors.
Thank you, Nana.
Maggie, thank you so much for talking to us. It's been amazing speaking to you. That is Maggie Oliver. She has set up the Maggie Oliver Foundation to help victims of abuse. She was the former detective and founder of her foundation. Fantastic. Now, 3 women were abused by the Rochdale grooming gang, and they received a sizable payout after the Greater Manchester Police admitted their shortcomings when dealing with the case. And earlier this year, in April, Stephen Watson, Chief Constable at the Greater Manchester Police, said the following: "It is a matter of profound personal regret that your childhood was so cruelly impacted by the dreadful experiences which you endured. GMP, or Greater Manchester Police, could and should have done much more to protect you, and we let you down. I hope that it will come as some little comfort to know that our confronting our failures in this regard means that it is altogether less likely that others will suffer as you did, and we will strive to keep improving our responses to similarly horrible circumstances to prevent the same from happening in the first instance, and relentlessly pursuing perpetrators so that they can be held fully to account." This is GB News. Coming up, it's the Great British Debate this hour, and I'm asking, which 3 issues should the new Prime Minister tackle first? Let's get your latest with your weather.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
It's coming up to 25 minutes after 5 o'clock. This is GB News. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. Now, it's time for our Great British Debate this hour, and I'm asking, which 3 issues should the new Prime Minister tackle first? In a matter of days, we'll have a new Conservative Prime Minister. In fact, it's tomorrow, isn't it? Midday, we'll know. facing some of the worst economic and social issues the country has faced in decades. There's energy bills which are skyrocketing and threaten to plunge millions into fuel poverty. The number of people crossing the English Channel in small boats has passed 26,000 this year, after more than 900 crossed yesterday. There's a record backlog in the NHS with almost 7 million people waiting for treatment. And, of course, we have the war in Ukraine, which rages on. So for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking which 3 issues should the Prime Minister tackle first? Joining me now is the social policy analyst, Dr. Rakib Hassan. Dr. Rakib, thank you so much for joining me. So from your perspective, what 3 issues would you like to see the new Prime Minister tackle?
Well, firstly, I think that the cost of living crisis has to be the next Prime Minister's priority. We have a very serious problem when it comes to the relatively high rates of inflation, but the rate of inflation is even higher for society's most deprived households. So whoever is the next Prime Minister, it does look like it's going to be Liz Truss, but whoever it may be, they have to find ways to get greater financial support to lower income families, especially those with young children. So I think that that would be the ultimate priority. I also feel that illegal immigration is a very serious problem, especially for the ruling Conservative Party. I think there may well be a change in who the Home Secretary will be. There's talk that if Liz Truss is the next Prime Minister, the next Home Secretary is likely to be Suella Braverman. And she seems very adamant that in order for this UK-Rwanda migration partnership to work, in order to facilitate deportations, she would entertain the possibility of the UK withdrawing from the ECHR. The Conservative Party seems to be very committed to the UK-Rwanda partnership. So you may well see that discussion about the UK's relationship with the ECHR being talked about a great deal. The third one for me is something that we've talked about a great deal, Nana, and that is family breakdown. I do think that next Prime Minister really has to introduce a pro-family revolution of sorts when it comes to social policy. And in a way, family breakdown is somewhat tied to the cost of living crisis. 3 in 10 children in the UK live in poverty, Nana, but that goes up to 1 in 2. Around 50% when it comes to children living in lone parent households. Now, of course, we should be against the stigmatization of single parents, but we have to be honest that there are particular social structures, social family structures, which are more strongly associated with positive youth outcomes, whether that's performing well at school, cognitive development, mental well-being. So I'd really like to see the family being at the heart of key government decisions going into the future.
You can get yourself in all sorts of problems with that one, with how you define family and what is the family, and because a single mum with 2 kids is a family. So that's, you know, the unit of family, and the description as to what a family is would be quite difficult for a government to sort of encapsulate. But I want to ask you about the NHS, because you've not mentioned that. What about the backlog there? Is that not a big issue for you? There's almost 7 million people waiting.
I think the backlog for me will also be right up there. I think that when you're looking at the issues more broadly from a Conservative perspective, the reality is that cost of living will be right up there in terms of what needs to be prioritised. But of course, the NHS backlog, much of that is to do with the COVID-19 pandemic. So it is a key issue, and it's also it should be an important issue for the Conservative government, because it's an issue where Labour traditionally have an advantage.
Although the backlog, they did have a bit of a backlog before then, and a lot of those problems
True.
as well. You know, and what about all the strikes though? I mean, there's everybody's going on strike. We'll probably end up with a general strike if a lot of those on the left get their way. What do you make of that?
Well, I think that what the cost of living crisis and these frequent forms of industrial action show is that the UK's economic model isn't quite working at this present moment. Now, of course, the strikes will be incredibly frustrating for many people in society. However, if the next Conservative Prime Minister was to chip away at workers' rights, or to place further restrictions on the right to strike and general trade union activity, then it may find itself in a bit of trouble in some so-called red wall constituencies, where trade unionism runs deep in some of those local communities. So it shows that there's a bit of a tension there in terms of how the Conservative Party can harness support, a newfound support, in areas where it traditionally didn't win, but won some of those seats in the last general election.
Well, it's a very fine balance that they're going to have to strike. And in one word or two, you can say two words, who would you like to see become Prime Minister?
Well, I think that in two words, I mean, I think it would be Liz Truss. That's what I have to say, but I don't have a strong preference, if truth be told.
OK. Well, listen, Dr. Rahib Hassan, thank you so much for talking to us. Always interesting to talk to you. He's the social policy analyst. Right, I'm also joined by the policy advisor at the Institute of Economic Affairs, Sam Collins. We'll talk to him after... Oh, he's here now. Oh, hello. Hello, Sam.
Hello, Nick.
There you go. Well Sam, there's loads of issues. We just realised that it's very difficult to choose three issues because there's so much to choose from. But if you could put three to the new Prime Minister, which ones would you like to see them tackle first?
Well, the three issues I'd like to see are actually sort of fit within one major policy area. And Dr. Rahib was absolutely right. The cost of living is going to be the big issue that's going to cause trouble for families up and down Britain for years to come. But I want to see the government engage in three areas where they can actually get some real runs on the board early on and help families. First one is housing. The British housing market has been broken for decades. I think everybody accepts that on all sides of the political aisle. The problem is that no one's been willing to actually grasp the nettle and free up planning rules to allow the houses to be built. We are approximately 3.5 million houses behind the European average on a house per capita basis. We need to be building a lot of houses now to bring rents down, to bring house prices down, and actually help more young people into homes. Second thing is deregulation. There's a huge number of areas where cutting expensive regulations on business will help the cost of living. For example, childcare, which is something that the IEA has been doing quite a lot of work on recently. Moving to the European average of, say, children to childcare workers would save approximately £300 per child per month. And that's a lot of money in people's back pocket, especially if they have a lot of children. There's a whole range of areas where deregulation can really help. The third one, not very sexy, but I think very important, is tax simplification. Liz Truss, both leadership candidates, but especially Liz Truss, have talked a huge amount about the need to cut taxes, or at least over the long term cut taxes. The problem is, though, that low taxes are all very well. Simple taxes are better. Simple taxes that people can understand, that don't distort the economy, that actually, that stop people from trying to fiddle the system and actually pay the taxes that they should pay, which I think everybody wants. So those would be the three main areas I would think we need to focus on.
And there's obviously loads more. We could go, there's a list as long as my arm, but if we did that, we'd miss the news. Sam, thank you so much for joining me. It's really good to talk to you. That is Sam Collins.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. He's a senior policy advisor for the IEA. Well, I'm Nana Akua. This is GBNews. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. We are the People's Channel. Now, on the way, we'll continue with our Great British debate this hour, and I'm asking, which three issues should the new Prime Minister tackle first? You'll hear the thoughts of my panel, consultant editor of the Daily Mail, Andrew Pearce, also former Liberal Democrat MP, Lebed Opik. And Shamima Begum is back in the news. But should she be allowed to be back in the UK? We'll be discussing that in our mini debate. But first, let's get your latest news headlines.
Thank you, Nana. It's 5:33. I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB newsroom. Two men have been arrested in connection with the death of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell in Liverpool. A 34-year-old has been arrested on suspicion of murder and attempted murder. Meanwhile, a 41-year-old from Knowsley has been arrested on suspicion of assisting an offender. Olivia died nearly 2 weeks ago after she was shot in her home. GB News can report that the number of people crossing the English Channel in small boats has now passed 27,000 this year. Around 1,000 migrants have crossed over today. The number of people making the journey has increased in recent days as weather conditions in the Channel improved. Liz Truss is defending her plans to cut the national insurance rise a day before the Conservative Party announces the next Prime Minister. Speaking on the BBC's Sunday with Laura Coombsberg programme, she said it was reasonable that the wealthiest received the biggest benefit. Meanwhile, appearing on the same programme, Rishi Sunak said if he becomes Prime Minister, he can't rule out introducing electricity blackouts due to rising prices. The Home Secretary says the Met Police must learn from the appalling mistakes of the past. Writing to the force's new commissioner, Priti Patel stressed the need to restore trust and confidence. It follows a number of high-profile scandals, including the murder of Sarah Everard by a serving officer. The 8-year-old twins and an 18-year-old woman killed in a violent incident in Ireland have been named. Police say twins Christy and Chelsea Corley and their sister Lisa Cash died overnight at a house in South Dublin. Their 14-year-old brother is in hospital with serious injuries. A man in his early 20s is in custody and police aren't looking for anyone else. TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Stay tuned. Nana's back in a moment.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
It is time for our great British debate this hour. I'm asking which three issues should the new Prime Minister tackle? First, if you just joined me, I'm Nana Akua. We're live on GB News. We're coming up to 39 minutes after 5 o'clock. Now, energy bills are skyrocketing. The number of people crossing the channel in small boats has actually passed 27,000, and that's just this year alone. We're not done with the year. And there are record backlogs in the NHS. Then, of course, there is the war in Ukraine, which is continuing. So for this debate this hour, I'm asking which three issues should the new Prime Minister tackle first? Let's see what my panel make of that. I'm joined by consultant editor of the Daily Mail, Andrew Pearce, and also former Liberal Democrat MP, Lembit Opik. Andrew, your thoughts. What are your three things?
The cost of living crisis obviously is the priority, and that's energy as well. That's all part of it. She's got to have a plan, Liz Truss, and quickly. Secondly, it is appalling how many people are crossing the channel, and they've got to have a really tough policy. Rwanda is still some months away because of these wretched lawyers. So if we have to come out of the European, whatever it is, let's pull out.
ECHR.
Exactly, because I think it really is sapping confidence in the country. This is outraging people, the number that are crossing the channel. They don't give a hoot. And finally, if you sort social care out, I think that will ease some of the crisis with the bed blocking in the NHS.
Yeah, it's a good twin. Social care is one, actually, that is a specifically targeted one within the NHS. Lembit.
Well, if Rishi wins, then he's got to organise those power blackouts for us.
Oh, my...
The power cuts he's telling us could happen under him.
Why would he say that?
What do you think? When you said that last week, I thought, well, that guarantees she's won.
Maybe he said it just to make sure that she does.
What is he thinking?
What was he thinking? He wasn't thinking.
It doesn't.
But he said it twice, apparently.
It's a slick campaign with rubbish content, basically. If Liz will win. Three things. I agree, cost of living crisis, but that's driven by the cost of energy. And we had that chat before. Just let's abandon this green dogmatic nonsense which is driving this country to the ground, and we can massively slash energy costs, like your guest Brian Catt also said. Secondly, let's get the transport policy sorted out. Lo and behold, first world nations don't operate on the basis of walking and cycling. You actually need engines to get people around. And all this robbery of road space with low traffic neighbourhoods and everything else, it just is patronising bilge. And if I was a Conservative, I wouldn't want my Conservative leader to be talking about that. And the third one, let's make the UK really an attractive place to do business internationally, which means sorting out one of the biggest mistakes Boris made, which is not doing a good trade deal with Brussels. I think he let them run rings around him. And then simple things like getting the relocation rules easy so that you can actually bring your company to the UK and think that's a really great place to do business. We do quite well already. About £4.5 billion a year comes into London alone, and maybe 7-8 billion a year to the UK because people relocate into this country. There are easy wins Liz Truss can get like that in the first few months to make it look like she's on the move.
Well, there's a lot of business regulations she could quickly scrap straight away, and that would be quite proficient. Well, I was struggling with which order to put them in, but because there were so many, I kept interchanging them. But I think the very first thing I would do, I would scrap net zero. Scrap it completely. The reason why, because I think it is one of the main drivers of this cost of living crisis.
Yeah, it is.
I think that if you scrap that, then you're halfway to achieving and improving the situation with the cost of living, because you're not, first of all, scrapping going towards these nonsense targets that seem to be the date of which has been plucked out of the air.
Right.
You're also going to enable yourself to use your coal. I'd use all of my resources, whilst I could head towards it and try and be more proficient in my utilisation of fuel and things, so that I could protect the environment. I would also take a really good look at the whole argument about CO2. I would want I'd actually put some money into getting a real understanding of what climate change is, and I wouldn't be forced in one direction. My second one would be, it's tricky, but I would definitely handle the situation with the migrant crossing. That would be something that I would make sure. And I know a lot of people complain and say, oh, well, Rwanda. Well, if we rewind many, many years ago, we've done this before, but except we sent people to Australia. You know what I mean? So I don't know why people are so, well, this is terrible, it's terrible. Well, actually, years ago, we sent people to Australia. We've done it before, we can do it again, and it was successful. And actually, a lot of people love Australia, settled there. A lot of people here from this country would actually want to go and live there. And I think my final one, I would deal with the NHS. I would get rid of all those managers. I would fine-tune it. I would make sure that there's no diversity managers. I'd get rid of these net zero managers. They would be gone, literally, the day I was in office.
They're still advertising for diversity directors and managers every week in the NHS. It's a scandal.
I think, Nana, if you were standing, you could beat Liz and Richie. I'd vote for you. Get a job.
Yeah, I'll give you a job then. You can be the climate, you can be in charge of climate.
I'd love to be the Secretary of State for the environment.
Yes, that's what you'd be. There's so many issues, though, to tackle.
I mean, she's inheriting the most difficult... It's the most difficult since Mrs Thatcher arrived in 1979 after the Winter of Discontent. She's got that, her inbox is so full with things to do, and I hope that she doesn't drown in it.
I think she's quite good at multitasking, I think. Let's see what some of you have been saying, because as Sasha says, my three priorities are illegal immigration, healthcare, and a review of foreign aid policies. Oh, that's a point, isn't it? Foreign aid.
There's not that much money, though. It's more of a principle.
Well, even if it's not that much money, it is some money, and it could fund quite nicely something in this country rather than somewhere else. Jazz says, why bother? It's not as if the next Prime Minister or any politician in general are going to genuinely attempt to tackle such issues concerning the electorate. Oh, don't be so negative, Jazz. Come on.
Turn that frown upside down.
Come on, Jazz, smile. John says we need to sort out three crises. Firstly, the energy crisis. Secondly, the cost of living crisis. And thirdly, the Brexit crisis. So it's interesting to mention Brexit. Nobody's mentioned Brexit.
Because we've got to sort out the Northern Ireland Protocol.
Actually, the thing I was talking about, getting the deal with Brussels solves something which me and others spent like a decade working on, 20 years, which was the Northern Ireland issue. It's really causing a lot of provocation there. And I think Liz can get quick wins there. like I said, just about simple changes to visas and that kind of thing, so that legitimate people wanting to come into the country can do so. But also, she's got to go over to Brussels and say, let's be adults about this now. We've had our fun. We have to coexist.
Yeah, that would be good if she could have that conversation. But I think I do remember someone within the EU, and I think it could be one of them there. I don't know which one, because they all look the same to me. But they said that they're really happy that it's Liz Truss, that they can just ignore her and just shoo her away type thing. Right. Because they don't really have any credibility to.
She's quite an empathic person, but I wouldn't. She used to be a Lib Dem, and I've been a Lib Dem, so I do know her. I wouldn't mix up her empathy for weakness. Now, we don't know yet, but I do think she has a certain strength. I hope she has a certain strength, because it doesn't help anybody in any party to have a weak Prime Minister.
No.
Well, I want her to be strong.
And she's very experienced, too. I mean,
Yes,
she's worked in 5 ministries, and she's been a Cabinet Minister for 8 years. Rishi Sunak had only been a Cabinet Minister for 5 minutes, really, by comparison. So she brings a lot of experience to that job, which is good.
That's all he's going to be, isn't it? This is the end of it. He's going to be a backbencher soon if he
certainly is.
That's what's going to happen.
Sitting in the dark by the side.
Yeah, that's right. Enjoy your blackout.
Yeah, exactly.
Get some candles, Rishi.
Well, this show is nothing without you. He's got a generator. He's got a generator. I'm saying that because he's not going to have to go through it. But this show is nothing without you and your views. Let's welcome our great British voice, your chance to tell us what you think about the topics we're discussing. Where should we go?
About Beverley?
Beverley.
Good choice.
Oh, where's Beverley?
Lovely place, north of England. Beautiful place.
Beautiful. Let's go to Dan Bryan. Oh, they've changed it. It's normally Hull. You've called it Beverley. Very good, because I always say Hull rhymes with dull.
I'm not in Hull, I'm in Beverley, actually. It's for real, because you said it was the worst place to live, so I thought I'd move.
Well, there's nothing that rhymes with Beverley anyway. So, Dan, what do you think, then? What would your top 3 be?
Well, there's been lots of talk about the energy crisis for domestic energy, but nobody seems to be talking about the problems businesses are facing. Domestic energy is doubled, fair enough, or it's going to go up 80%. I can't remember what the exact figure is. But energy costs for businesses, ours has tripled already, and that's before we get the hikes in October and then January. There's a landlord from a pub in Hull that I know. His energy bill's gone from £1,200 a month to £8,500 a month. So that is unsustainable. The businesses will be going to the wall. And then I heard you discussing about net zero. The problem with net zero is they've made it completely political. I see nothing wrong with looking after the environment and doing your bit to recycle and, composting all your rubbish. In fact, that's going to help the farmers given the fertiliser costs. But the net zero thing, they've made it really political, and I think that's what's turning people off.
Well, I think they've actually made it up. And by the way, cleverly rhymes with Beverly. See you later, Dan. Thank you very much for joining us. That's Dan Bryan. You see, that was cleverly of me. That doesn't make sense. I've ruined it. I was doing well up till then. Yeah, so let's have a quick summary on that then. So your top 3, very briefly, just as a reminder.
Yeah, it's cost of living / energy, the migrants, which is a scandal, and social care, which will help sort out problems in the NHS.
Honest energy, fossil fuel-based policy and nuclear. Proper transport policy, which doesn't make us all have to cycle, and let's make sense of our relationship with Europe and the world.
I like it. Well, listen, let's hope that Liz Truss can do that. I mean, it's got to be her, hasn't it? Especially after what Richie said. Come on. Right, we'll move on to another story that caught my eye today. Now, senior Canadian intelligence officials say that they can support an inquiry into their organisation's role in the smuggling of Shamima Begum to Syria. Now, Begum, who was aged 15 at the time, was raised in East London's Bethnal Green, but left the UK with her 2 friends in 2015 to join the terrorist group Islamic State. And since then, Begum has been appealing to have her citizenship restored after a court ruling that left her stateless. So for this mini-debate, I'm asking, should the ISIS bride be let back into the UK? I'll start with you, Lembit.
Possibly, and here's why.
Oh.
Just because you've got a past doesn't mean you can't have a future. That was a line from the late David Trimble, who was a good friend and very influential in the Northern Ireland peace process. I've worked with terrorists, people who didn't just do bad things, they murdered people. And in the end, we realised that rather than just banging everybody up and giving them no platform, we had to get people together. Now, I don't know this woman. That's why I say possibly. If she's genuinely reformed, like so many people in the Northern Ireland peace process, I'd let her back in. I don't like the fact that somebody is banned for life. And the reason I can't answer it, because I've never met her, I have not got any psychological insight into this woman, but I wouldn't, on principle, ban somebody.
I don't want her to come back here. I don't know if she's like Limber. I don't know if she's been de-radicalised. Has she? Because if she hasn't, do you want that woman living next to you in your street? Absolutely not. We are told that she's when she was out there, she sewed people into suicide bomb vests. That is an appalling crime. She also, when she gave that first interview to The Times, she said she had no regrets about what she'd done, and she'd seen beheaded heads in skips. She was a brutal apologist for ISIS. And if she really did sew people into those suicide vests, she should not come back here. She should face a trial in Syria.
Well, I think that she said she didn't want to be here. She said she wanted to join ISIS, so good luck to her. She certainly shouldn't be coming back. I don't trust that. We can all say what people want to hear. You've heard our politicians do that, and then do the very opposite. So, no, I'm not convinced. A leopard doesn't change its spots. Right, so... Well,
that's that, then.
Yeah, that's that. That's the end of that one. So it is time now for Supplement Sunday. This is the part of the show where me and my panel look at some of the other stories that are in the papers today. So first off, Andrew, you've got the story about the resurgence of the chimney sweep.
Chimney.
Yes.
Did you watch Mary Poppins?
I did, yes.
So chimney sweeps are apparently rushed off their feet, according to this story in the Mail on Sunday, as the energy crisis bites, because families are... fireplaces that haven't been used for decades, they're bringing them back into use. And, of course, what you've got to do is get the chimney sweeps to go up. It can cost £200, and they are apparently worked off their feet.
Oh, lovely. Well, that's good. I think it's a good
Nice,
idea.
yeah.
I used to have an old Victorian house, or Edwardian, somebody told me that. I said, it was Victorian. They said, when was it built? I said, 1900 whatever. And she went, well, Edward was on the throne at that time. It's Edwardian. I'm like, where did you come from? But anyway, Lembit.
About this one?
No, we'll go on then. What do you think?
I love the romance of the wood fire, and based on my other views, I have no problem with people burning coal. More ominously, in Germany, they're cutting down trees because they can't afford the fuel. So we're kind of getting into a situation where the forests have been burned down because of our own balmy policies.
Yeah, it's not working, is it? Well, Emmett, you've also got a story. Tell us about this. It's the delay of the Artemis rocket launch.
Yeah, this one annoys me. It's in the Telegraph. Artemis 1 launch. NASA bungles second attempt at groundbreaking mission to the moon. And actually, he says one's misfortune, but botch 2 is beginning to look like carelessness. Way wrong answer, Telegraph. This is a really big deal. We're talking about tens of billions of dollars. The most important space mission in terms of public interest, and I suppose the future of society. As you know, I'm involved in something called Ascardia, I want us to live in space. And we've got to get it right, because imagine if the thing blows up on the launch pad. Or worse still, imagine that they're lucky with this one, and then there are 4 people on the next one, and they get incinerated. So the first woman, the first person of colour, going to the moon, and we all watch a disaster like the shuttle. We can take a month on this. No one's going to remember the delay, but they will remember the achievement.
What do you think about that, the delay? It's not...
Well, I mean, it's hugely important that it works. It's fantastic, and I think the Telegraph have probably over-egged that story, haven't they?
Well, also, I hear that hydrogen is a very leaky fuel, so it's difficult to contain, and it was from a leak through a hydrogen pipe, and so that's what I understand.
I'd love to go to space, into space. I would love it.
Join Ascardia.
Well, there we are.
There's nothing there, though.
Yeah, but I just like the trip.
Well, it's just got no atmosphere, but there's a lot of...
There's no atmosphere.
I don't think I can afford it. I think it's quite expensive.
It will come down.
Do you think so?
In our lifetime...
What are they charging at the moment?
Oh, it's not affordable now.
No, I wouldn't was going to...
Millions.
Well, I've got a little story for you, and it's about Afro swimming caps. And it's basically there was a specifically designed swimming cap for Afro hair, and last year it was banned because obviously they didn't know whether it would give you any advantage or whatever the reason was. I don't really understand why. I think it's a bit silly, but they were barred by FINA on the grounds that, to their best knowledge, the athletes competing at the international events had never used, neither required to use the caps of such a big size because of the configuration. So they don't know whether there could have been an advantage or anything like that. But it did cause outcry, which is ridiculous, because obviously Afro hair is as you've seen Calvin's afro. You're not seeing mine, and when you get to my age, it all falls out. You'll never get to see me under this, never. You wouldn't even recognise me, actually, it's a disguise. But basically, these caps, obviously slightly bigger and everything else like that, but now they've approved them. They've announced officially that they're allowed to have this inclusive range within the whole sporting world. But I think it's a bit of a nonsense that it was even an issue to begin with.
Yeah, why was it, really?
Because...
The march of political correctness.
On the one side, on the other side, everyone's scared of an advantage.
Yeah.
Everyone's scared that maybe it'll give you a bit better streamlining.
Yeah.
And remember all the stuff about sounds?
Than that.
Yeah,
I think it's simpler than that. I think there were no people of colour on the board that made that decision because they didn't understand. Because if they had, or I'd been there, I'd have gone, don't be so ridiculous. Here, wear this afro wig, now try to get that swimming cap on that you've approved. So I think it was just a case of ignorance, actually. Yeah.
Well, who are we to gainsay you, madam?
I wouldn't argue with me, Limbit, or else you won't be back.
I completely agree with what you just said, and so does Andrew.
See, it's great, it's wonderful. Well, listen, on today's show, we've been asking, is wind energy a viable option? Well, let's see what you've been saying. According to our Twitter poll, 26% of you say yes and 74% of you say no. See, when I read it before, it was the wrong way round, but I read it the right way round, but it was written wrong.
I would have been amazed if it had been anything else. Because people know it's ridiculous.
We know it's ridiculous. It's a nice idea. It could provide a certain level of support, but it certainly isn't a full viable option.
I'm sorry, it's just potty.
It is potty.
Yeah.
Well, listen, thank you so much to my panel, consultant editor of the Daily Mail, Andrew Pearce. Andrew, thank you very much.
Lovely to be here.
And also former Liberal Democrat MP, Limbit Opium. Thank you very much, Limbit. And also a big thank you to you for joining me at home. It's been a pleasure as ever. Remember, you can catch up with everything here on GB News by downloading the GB News app or watching us live on YouTube. You can stream everything here. But I'll be back next Friday at 4. Take care, enjoy. I'm going to leave you with the weather forecast. Have a fabulous week.
This evening, the UK weather is looking unsettled as low pressure sits to the west of us, bringing in spells of rain. Let's take a look at the details. Southwest England will see further showers. Some could be heavy and perhaps thundery as well, turning windy for a time, especially around the coasts. Mostly dry across southeast England and London, with clear spells and generally light winds. The possibility of a few showers, mainly in the north. An increasing risk of showery rain across southern parts of Wales this evening. This could be heavy in places and perhaps thundery too, turning windy. Mostly cloudy this evening across the Midlands, with an increasing risk of a few showers, which could be on the heavy side. Feeling quite humid with the temperatures around 19 Celsius and wind staying light. A mixed end to the day for north-east England. There will be the risk of a few showers, though most places should stay dry. Wind staying light with temperatures around 21 Celsius. A mainly dry evening for southern parts of Scotland, with plenty of clear spells and generally light winds. The risk of a few light showers, mainly in the east. A largely dry end to the day across Northern Ireland, with just some fair weather cloud around. A fairly low risk of an isolated shower later on around the coast. Overnight, bands of heavy